NBC Sunday Night at the Movies will return following these messages.
This is NBC News Digest, sponsored by Summeralls. Here is Roger Mudd, NBC News.
Good evening. The joy of summer's first weekend was dimmed today by terrorism and death. A bomb in the luggage from a Canadian Pacific airliner killed 2 baggage workers at a Tokyo airport and injured 4 others. An Air India jet exploded in the air off the coast of Ireland. 329 are believed dead. And in London, a bomb was found in a hotel near Buckingham Palace today. Police were able to defuse it. Now this.
Help keep your world cool and beautiful. Wear new Summeralls this summer.
The Israelis will release tomorrow 31 of the Lebanese prisoners they're holding, but the Amal spokesmen in Beirut say they want all 766 in exchange for the 40 Americans. I'm Roger Mudd in New York. There will be an NBC News special report tonight at 11:30, 10:30 Central Time.
This is NBC News Digest. Here is Roger Mudd, NBC News.
Good evening. If tomorrow's release by Israel of 31 of its Lebanese prisoners means the beginning of the end of the TWA hostage crisis, no one is saying so officially. President Reagan, returning from Camp David today, said there was no link.
It is a problem of their own, and under their law, those 31 people are being released. It has nothing to do with our hostages.
At dawn tomorrow off the Irish coast, the search will resume for more bodies from the Air India crash. 329 people were aboard when the jet crashed. The Saudi prince aboard the space shuttle said today that troublemakers should view the Earth without national boundaries as he just did. Discovery comes back tomorrow. I'm Roger Mudd in New York. An NBC News special report tonight at 11:30, 10:30 Central.
This is NBC News Digest, sponsored by Budweiser. Here is Edwin Newman, NBC News.
Good evening. After a 4-hour cabinet meeting today, the Israeli government said it would not withdraw its troops from Lebanon until Syrian forces leave. There had been reports that the Israeli military were advocating a unilateral withdrawal. Texaco today announced a formal agreement to buy Getty Oil for nearly $10 billion. Texaco said a court injunction delaying the deal had been lifted. Now this.
This Bud's for everyone who's got the heart and courage to go the distance. For all you do. This Bud's for you.
The Census Bureau reports that during the 70s, the number of Asians and Pacific Islanders in the United States jumped by 146%. They came to 3.75 million people in 1980, 1.6% of the population. Edwin Newman, NBC News, New York.
This is NBC News Digest. Here is Tom Brokaw, NBC News.
Good evening. Terrorism on the high seas in the Middle East tonight, the seizure of an Italian passenger ship by Palestinian commandos who threatened to blow up the cruise liner Achille Lauro, now off Egypt's coast, unless 50 Palestinian prisoners in Israel are released. They have warned all other ships not to approach the hijacked vessel. They're now threatening to execute passengers, starting with the Americans, unless their demands are broadcast by Egyptian radio and television. The cruise line official in Naples said an undetermined number of Americans were aboard originally, but that a sightseeing party of some 700 left the ship at Alexandria before the terrorists boarded. At 11:30 Eastern Time tonight, NBC News will have a special report on the hijacking. I'm Tom Brokaw in New York.
This is NBC News Update, brought to you by General Motors. Now here is Jessica Savage.
Good evening. In just a few minutes, President Reagan will warn the nation it faces economic calamity unless it attacks inflation and unemployment. President Reagan's first televised address on the economy will be carried next here on NBC. Tonight, more than 12,000 Polish workers walked off their jobs in a town along the Soviet border. The protest came as a former Polish prime minister was ousted from the Communist Party. Marine Private Robert Garwood today was convicted of collaborating with the enemy while he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And Ella Grasso, who was governor of Connecticut for 6 years, died tonight of cancer. She was 61. I'm Jessica Savage in Washington. More news later on this NBC station.
This is NBC News Update, sponsored by Sony. Here is Jessica Savage.
Good evening. The U.S. Court of Appeals tonight blocked an order that would have meant the end of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization. Earlier today, the government decertified PATCO because of the air controllers' strike. Congress tonight passed a 4-year farm bill, which the administration says will cost $5.6 billion more than legislation already passed by the Senate. President Reagan told world leaders at the economic summit in Cancun, Mexico late today that the United States was ready to talk about ways to help poorer countries. And today our national debt officially went over the $1 trillion mark, said one Treasury official, quote, "It is not an issue for celebration." I'm Jessica Savage in New York. More news later on this NBC station.
This is NBC News Update, sponsored by Ideal Toys. Here is Jessica Savage.
Good evening. PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, is back in business tonight. The U.S. Court of Appeals stayed a decision decertifying the union because of the air traffic controllers' strike. Mexico's President Jose Lopez Portillo opened the World Economic Summit in Cancun today, saying the World Economic Order as it now stands is unjust and unfair. President Reagan said the United States was willing to discuss ways to help poorer nations. And an American mountain climbing team has reached the top of Mount Everest and carried out the first medical tests ever at the world's highest mountain. I'm Jessica Savage in New York. More news later on this NBC station.
This is NBC News Update, brought to you by Lipton. Here is Jessica Savage.
Good evening. In Poland today, some compromise between the Solidarity Union and the government. The union will work one Saturday a month, while the government promised the union access to the media. But with some issues unresolved, the union may yet strike on Tuesday. In El Salvador, guerrillas say they will renew their offensive against the ruling junta, while in Frankfurt, West Germany, 15,000 people staged an anti-American rally to protest U.S. military aid to the government of El Salvador. And Vietnam veterans marched in Indianapolis today to protest the attention paid the former hostages. They say few people welcome them home. I'm Jessica Savage in New York. More news later on this NBC station.
Country-style cup.